everyone, and I'd like to welcome you to the first of the Open Pedagogy Lightning Talks. And this is a project that the University of Alberta, the University of Calgary, and Thompson Rivers University have been working on almost for a year now. So what we're planning to do with these is that we are going to be happening every day this week, and they are meant to be 15-minute talks where people engage in open pedagogical practices. We'll talk about what's going on with them. And we're using the term open pedagogical practices in the way that Michael Pashkevicius did, in that he's saying that it's teaching and learning practices where openness is enacted within all aspects of instructional practice, including the design of learning outcomes, the selection of teaching resources, and the planning of activities and assessment. OEP engages both faculty and students within the use and creation of OER and supports participatory student-directed projects. So we have some really great speakers to start us off today. So I would like to, first of all, introduce our first speakers, Annie Prud'homme-Genereux, Verena Roberts, and Natasha Ramroop Singh, speaking about using OEP to engage first-year biology students online. So Annie and Natasha, did you want to get started?
Yeah, thank you so much, Brenda, for that lovely introduction. So good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thank you for being here this morning. Today, myself, Natasha, and Annie will be disseminating to you a body of work that has been almost almost recently concluded, where we essentially rewrote one of our online offerings of our enrollment courses for our biology students. And I was happy, Brenda, to hear your definition of OEP, because I feel like this is exactly what we did, where we would have looked at the traditional ways of writing an online course. And we really honed in on things like activities and the methods of assessment for our students to increase engagement. Okay, so basically, typically, as I just mentioned, online courses are, fairly straightforward, for want of a better word. Students are required to buy a textbook. It's separated out into units or modules. Each modules may have a quiz and an assignment. There's generally a midterm and a final exam. And we basically turned this structure on its head, and we completely rearranged and reorganized the way that we ask the students to interact with the material. So we want to go through that with you today. So the course itself is Principles of Biology 1. It's, as I said, it's an enrollment course. Generally, all students entering into a range of programs, they are required to take this course. It's a foundation course. So as you've seen here, we've outlined the way that we broke apart the course. We have 4 units, and each unit was broken down further into 4 topics. And we use this structure to then kind of create the writing itself and align with the learning objectives. Basically, this slide is showing us the layout of each of those topics within each unit. So we started with an introduction, which gave a very general overview of what that topic was going to discuss. We included something very interesting, which was a to-do list. So this to-do list basically outlined every single activity and assignment or reading that we would have suggested throughout the topic, and we indicated whether we require them to be mandatory or optional. We also included the time that should be taken, or the average amount of time that they may take to do each of these activities, and that way the students had a very good idea of what to expect going into a topic and going into a unit at the outset, so that they were able to better manage their time. Okay. We used a lot of, open source material, images. We used a lot of YouTube videos, again, including the time taken to view these videos. One of the things that we're very proud of in this course is the creation of a new press book. So we did identify an open textbook, which we utilized. But instead of just, putting the PDF or the link there for the students to go and, rifle through, we pulled out the relevant sections that were required for each topic and put them in a Pressbook, and then linked the sections within each topic throughout Moodle. So this way, the students have something to take away at the end of their course, and then they can refer to time and time again. And it also kind of brings down the level of anxiety, I think, when they see all of, this huge textbook that they have to go through. We really kind of pulled out what we needed them to focus on. Throughout each of the topics, we had quick check questions, which were multiple choice questions. Again, this was just designed to test their learning as we're going through the material. There were a lot of different websites and scientific articles that we led them to. We're very proud of our use of the HHMI interactive online exercises and a lot of these, what we call fun home activities and experiments. Now, you would see the word SPLOT next to the word assessment. So I'll touch upon that in a little bit, okay? So this here is just a snapshot of some of the fun home activities that we ask students to do. Things like telephone evolve or evolve telephone, which is basically where they pass the message through a text message. This was to exemplify how mutations happen in DNA. We asked them to create pedigree charts or family trees by interviewing friends and family. We asked them to observe the freezing of water, to explain what happens through their use of hydrogen bonding. And we asked them to observe the fermentation of yeast. So all of these activities, we asked them to basically upload writing, videos, and images in a SPLOT that we created. So the next slide actually shows what the students see when they go into the SPLOT. So this way, the students are, they're showing us what they've done, and they're explaining how the experiment that they did allowed them to, apply the material that they're learning in the course. And this is available for all students within the course to see. So it created a real sense of a community within the course, which, as we know, sometimes is lacking in online platforms. Yeah, so in my last slide, for my half of the presentation, I just want to touch upon the assessments. As you can see, we have a lot of, we had SPLOTs as part of the assessments, which we just saw, and there were case studies, and case studies is a very big part of what this course and how we did this course differently. So I'll pass you on to Annie now, because this was certainly her forte. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name's Annie, and with Natasha and Verena, we worked on this biology courses at TRUOL. And one of the things we really wanted to do was to make it more student-centered. Now, the expertise that I contribute to this is the use of case studies to teach and to learn. And so what I want to do with my part of this lightning talk is to kind of bring you up to speed as to how we created and adapted case studies for the use of an OER press book, basically, and integrated into the course. So what I want to do with you is to first describe what a case study is to make sure we're all on the same page. After that, describe how we had to modify and adapt this to make it an OER in a self-paced course. And then finally, I want to talk about the all-important issue of evaluation and what we did there. And so just to make sure we're all on the same page, a case study is just basically a story that you're going to use to learn or to teach. That's really what it means. And it encompasses a whole lot of things. Research seems to suggest that students react better when the stories are authentic, which makes sense, right? You do better when you think that something is actually something that's in the real world. And they come in a variety of different formats. So if you're looking at this list of formats, and this is by no means the entire list of case study formats that are out there, but I think what you might be able to recognize some of them. You might have used a debate or a role play in your classroom. The one that I prefer to use, and it is probably the one that's most often used in a science environment, is the interrupted or progressive disclosure case study. And I'll take you through what it looks like in the classroom, because then we'll talk about what were the opportunities to adapt it to a self-paced online OER environment, which we had to tweak it quite a bit, actually, but there were some interesting opportunities along the way. So in the classroom, the way that a case study works is you get students to work collaboratively in a small group to resolve the case. So you provide a bit of narrative. Usually it's only 1 or 3 paragraphs, just the information that they need. And then, so this is what the section that's highlighted in blue here. And then you have a series of questions, usually between 3 to 5 questions that the students first discuss in their small group. And then you go to a whole group discussion where you pull in the ideas from each of the groups. You provide feedback on the thinking. And what's really great about this format, the reason that I love it, is because it's a way for students to practice the skills of thinking like a scientist, or if you were in another discipline, of thinking professionally, like a professional in that field. And the reason is because those questions get students to not just analyze the information that was just provided, but to predict what would be the next step. What would you do as a professional in this field, in this case, as a scientist in this field, to think through the next stage? And this type of case study is called interrupted because then once the information has been provided and the students have thought about it, there's a next part of the case that's given out. So it's a page of information and the students discuss it again in small groups, large group to debrief, make sure everybody's on the same page, and then we go on. And often there's up to about 3 parts of a case study. So what did we do now to modify this for an OER format where the students are working individually now in an online environment? And so this is the format that I just described, right? And so questions, narrative in blue, questions in yellow, and then different parts of it. But if you think about it, online, the reason we have it in person, the reason we have it in 3 formats is really as a classroom management tool, right? We're doing that to be able to manage the groups and then provide feedback at different times. But if the student's going through it individually, there's really no need for that kind of large-scale management. We can provide the narrative and then ask the question just in time, just when it's necessary. And so then it breaks up a bit the way in which you would do the case study, because you provide just enough information and then you get the students to stop. You don't have to provide as much. Just when it makes sense, you ask the question related to that content, get students to anticipate or predict the next step, and then they move on. In the context of science, it could just be you provide an observation, you say, what do you think the scientists hypothesized? And then the student goes through it, tells you what they think the scientists hypothesized, and then you can provide feedback before you move on to the next section. It's really good for helping shape how students think professionally, and it also builds confidence, because when they see that even as novice, they can think like a professional, it builds their confidence in their abilities to think. And so this is one of the adaptations that we had to do from in-person case studies to bringing it online as an OER, is that we could break it up more frequently and ask questions just in time when it became relevant. The other thing that we could do now is that instead of providing feedback verbally and through group discussions and collaborations, we would have to do it in our course. It's a self-paced online course. And so the students needed to have some kind of feedback. We embedded the case studies within an H5P format, and then we use a variety of different H5P question formats that would allow, so that could be anything from multiple choice to drag and drop. And then we could provide feedback to the students on their answer so that we could correct any thinking that may have gone astray, and then get them back on course for solving the case. And so basically we used the capabilities of H5P, which we then embedded into the press book that Natasha talked about. So the press book was modified, not just in terms of picking and choosing and making each chapter align with the learning objectives of the course, but also we embedded some interactive activities, which are the case studies. And here's some images of what it might look like. One important thing is that we provided feedback on each of the student responses. We anticipated, especially this was easy for multiple choice, what some of the responses would be, and then we provided feedback on each of those. Now, where do we obtain our cases? We obtain our cases from basically 2 sources. Probably the largest database of case studies for the sciences is the National Center for Case Study Teaching in Science. So they have over 1,000 peer-reviewed case studies. They're all free for educators and students to use. They're not OER per se. The copyright is owned by the National Center for Case Study Teaching in Science. The reason that those case studies were great to use is because, well, there's thousands of them. So you could search by learning objectives and we could find the one we want. So it's quicker, right, than the next option, which you can already see is going to be your developer own. But then we were somewhat limited in terms of how we could use them because they gave us a license to use the cases that we pulled out. And again, we could use it free of charge, but we couldn't put it into the press book because the press book was going to become an OER and we didn't have the copyright. So we could only embed it within the course, within the learning management system. The other option was to write our own courses, which we did. We write a number of them. So what's great about them is that you can customize them to the learning objectives of your course and embed them in the BC context, because for us, the course, the students were going to be in BC, so we could write cases about our local environment. They then became Creative Commons license, and then we could give back to the community, which is something that we really wanted to do. So if you look, this table is meant to represent all the different topics and units that Natasha talked about in this course. And one thing that you might notice is that whenever there were cases that were for practice, basically for formative assessment, they were our own cases. And that's because it was easier to embed them in a press book. There were no license considerations. And then when a case study was done for formative evaluation, we embedded it as part of the course. It was behind the LMS password, and that became a case for summative evaluation. And you can see that we gave students plenty of practice and then evaluated so that they became familiar with the format, and we weren't evaluating them on the format, we were evaluating them on their ability to apply practice. So I'll just wrap it up by saying what were some of the lessons learned. Again, our goal was to integrate more student-centered practices into an OER self-paced course. And some of the things that we learned is that it takes a lot of time, not just to develop, but also to teach, because you're going to have to train the teachers who teach using this course how to implement those resources, which is different. The other thing that we are anticipating is that from the SPLOT activities that Natasha talked about, this gets students to do a lot of metacognition, and for the case studies, practice higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy. So we expect students to be operating at higher levels. Natasha got an opportunity to test some of these in her in-person class, so it gave us feedback on the activities right away, and we could know whether this was likely to work or not work. We wanted to give back to the OER community, which this allowed us to do. And finally, this has not been implemented yet. It's going to implement it starting fall. That's when the students first get a chance to try this course. So stay tuned and we'll let you know how it all worked out. So thank you very much. Looking forward to your questions and to seeing what everybody else has been doing as part of this conference.
So next, I would like to introduce Jamie Drozda and Brenna Clarke-Gray from Thompson Rivers University, who are talking about lessons learned on our test drive, iterative development of WordPress ePortfolios. So Jamie and Brenna, would you just like to join us?
Hi, absolutely. Hi, everybody. I hope that our slides are showing okay here. So yeah, we're here to talk about the ePortfolio, the way we use ePortfolios at TRU, and some of the iterative development that we've done around trying to make them more user-friendly and also more self-serve, so that we don't need to offer quite as much support, both in the creation and issuing of ePortfolios and in the actual use of them. So my name is Brenna Clarke-Gray. My colleague Jamie Drozda is here. We're both coordinators in educational technologies at Thompson Rivers University. So we're part of the learning technology and innovation team at TRU. We're housed within open learning, but we support primarily campus faculty, and these portfolios are primarily in use in this iteration anyway by campus faculty in their sort of more traditional courses. I just want to note that we do live and work on the Tk'emlúps te Secwépemc territory within the unceded traditional lands of Secwépemc, where learning has taken place since time immemorial. And if you have a chance and you'd like to share your territory in the chat where you're joining us from, we'd love to know. It's such a disembodied space, these Zoom calls, and good to remember that we all still have a territory that we call home. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Jamie to let you know how we're going to approach our conversation today.
Thanks, Brenna. Our ePortfolio iterative development came about quite organically. This is not something we planned, but rather something we noticed and acted on. We really did think we were doing great things when we were developing each of our phases. But when we started implementing our ideas and projects, we realized that, in fact, there was quite a bit of work to be done and revisions needed to be made. We were quite surprised at how our participants interacted with our WordPress templates, and we will take you through each phase individually. Phase 1 is Jamie's, MET work, and MET stands for Masters of Educational Technologies program at UBC. Phase 2 is the Beyond Moodle workshop that Brenna and I co-developed and co-facilitated. And phase 3 is the PIDP course that Brenna and I also co-developed and co-facilitated. And I should mention, for those who aren't aware, that PIDP stands for Provincial Instructor Diploma Program, which is offered at the Vancouver Community College in BC. And finally, we'll discuss where we're going from here. But first, Brenna's going to take you through TRU's clone zone.
Yeah, so to understand the way ePortfolios are used at TRU, you need to understand what the clone zone is and how it works. So the clone zone is like our self-service WordPress portal. So as long as you have a TRU email address, you can go into the clone zone site, which is just a page on our WordPress site. And you can sign up for an account on truebox.ca, which is our WordPress server. And also you can choose one of the pre-developed templates. And we have them for all kinds of things. So we have some that are really specific, our TESOL program, some of our journalism courses. We've developed ePortfolios with those courses. And so students can go straight there to get their sort of custom boutique ePortfolio. And then we also have more general ePortfolios for all kinds of different projects that can be used for, they can be used for students doing job applications or wanting to present their work creatively. We now have an ePortfolio template that's ready to go for a podcast site if you wanted to start a podcast. And the nice thing about these portfolios is we can kind of preload them with different templates or different plugins and stuff already activated. So like, for example, if you download the podcasting template, it's already ready to go with the podcasting plugin so that you don't have to do any of the sort of complicated stuff yourself. You don't have to research the plugins. You don't have to figure it out. It's all ready to go out of the box. So the clone zone is pretty unique because it gives people a lot of freedom and control over what they do. And the only thing we need is a TRU address, either the faculty, tru.ca, faculty and staff, or the student, mytru.ca, and that is what kind of authenticates the user as being part of our community. So yeah, it's nice. It's self-serve. You can do them live in workshops with students and get them right on board, or you can just send them away to go and do it asynchronously in their own time. And it's been really successful just in terms of, well, the sheer number of sites on the TrueBox server is a good testament to just how successful the clone zone is. So yeah, you need to understand kind of that framework to understand why we were trying to build ePortfolio templates with so much information preloaded in them. So I'll let Jamie explain the first iteration.
Great. So while I was in the MET program, I was asked to do a lot of group work, and having a background in computing science and working with a team that uses WordPress heavily, I was able to convince all of my groups to create websites to host our content rather than submitting Word documents or PDFs. So I would create and set up a site and then spend time with each of my group members, my partners, to show how to edit WordPress pages and create H5P interactivities. Every group I worked with was so delighted with our end results, and they were all grateful for learning how to author in WordPress. Now, MET has an optional graduating project course, which is intended to be an ePortfolio of our experiences in MET. And this was mine and a friend, Melanie's, second to last course, and we were in it together. We both spent many hours helping our classmates author online. And that is when we realized there was a need for ePortfolio templates. And I remember talking to Brenna about this back then. But throughout the program and this course, there were so many students who did not have the technical expertise or the funds to develop and maintain a website. Therefore, many students sought out free options that really exploited them. So our vision was to create 6 different WordPress templates that were complete with instructions, writing prompts, and exercises. And we were able to use this project as a directed studies course to complete our program at UBC. And we received excellent feedback. We were so excited and proud of our work. And TRU and OpenETC even added our templates to their WordPress clone zones. But little did we know, this really wasn't the end of our project. It was the beginning, and very much the beginning. So we're going to go on to phase 2 now, beyond Moodle.
I should note that Jamie completed the MET both in record time and during the pandemic while we were moving 500 faculty online at TRU. So her work was really informed by a need to streamline processes, which has been really useful in terms of like our iterative development later, but I think it's worth noting that that was part of the context. So the first time we test drove one of these was with our Beyond Moodle workshop. And so the idea here was we had this user base suddenly much more adept with technology as we began the return to campus back in the fall. And typically on our campus, when faculty are using Moodle in a face-to-face course, they're typically using it as mostly a one-way communication tool. They're posting things, they might be collecting some assignments, but for the most part, it's one way. And so we knew that people had a bit of Moodle fatigue. We wanted our community to continue developing their skills, which they had come such a long way with over the course of the fully online teaching year. And we wanted to provide another option. So we tried one of our portfolio options. I think this is Hamilton, isn't it, Jamie? You think?
Yes.
It looks Hamilton-y.
Yeah.
Maybe. And so McLuhan, it's McLuhan. It's not important, yes. But it's McLuhan. It's definitely McLuhan. Okay. So we did up the template as though it was for a course. So we built in all the different sections, your course description, your schedule, your assessments. And we showed folks how to use Gravity forms as a kind of Dropbox stand-in, also a way to gain feedback from students. And it was a really interesting workshop because we got lots of energy around it, lots of positive feedback. Lots of people were really tired of staring at Moodle. And oftentimes the learning management system is not the best way to organize information. And so for people who were using it as a primarily one-way communication tool, the idea of having another way to organize things was really attractive. But what we began to notice as people were kind of taking that information from the workshop and going away with it, is that the templates were maybe a bit sticky in that the information that we put in the template tended to stick around a little bit longer than we expected it to. And that really became clear to us the same semester when Jamie and I taught the Provincial Instructor Diploma Program course, where we actually assigned our ePortfolios using the templates that Jamie had created.
I remember being so excited for this course for technology for teaching and learning at TRU. And I thought we created a dream assignment. Students were to create a course portfolio that demonstrated their learning over the course of the term. During each class, we went over skills that were necessary for completing this assignment. And we even had 2 virtual drop-in sessions a week where students could pop in and receive any and all help they needed. Students would be able to self-select what content they wanted to include in their ePortfolio. We provided a list of 12 different options to choose from, and each option had a points value attached to it. So the assignment was out of 60 points. If a student did 60 points worth of work, they received 60 out of 60. It was perfect. So some examples are they could do a response post of 500 words or a 3-minute video on what they wanted to teach with technology or why they took the course, and that would be worth 10 points. They could create an interactive video using H5P or Kaltura or build a Twine game, and that was worth 20 points. They could build out a set of Slido questions and they would receive 5 points. And the list of options, it went on. I won't drag you through all of them.
And students could also propose additional items to list, and some did.
Yeah, they did. And they could propose their own points value, what they figured it was worth. We were pretty flexible with this. But what surprised us the most was how students interacted with the WordPress templates. They were afraid to edit them. They were afraid to delete or revert all the embedded instructions to drafts. And we were quite afraid we created a disaster assignment at one point. Like, we weren't actually sure what we were going to do. But after much work and much coaching, the ePortfolios actually were a success. And that we were pretty relieved at the end of the course. We had concrete ePortfolios of the students learning. But where do we go from here? How do we make the templates better? And Brenna's going to go over some ideas we have.
So, of course, the purpose behind having pre-created templates on a self-serve service is that you shouldn't need that level of intensive support. And so we realized that there was a disconnect between how we expected the templates to be used, right? Like, if I get access to a template, the first thing I do is delete all the lorem ipsum, right? Like, that's my first move. We were surprised. And what we came to realize as we talked students through the process of actually deleting that content is they were very nervous about losing those instructions. So they saw the idea of like cutting and pasting or deleting as kind of like, well, how would I go back, right? And we would say, the original template is here. The instructions are still available on the web. You can go to them. But there was a real concern or real anxiety about stepping away. That said, we know from every other support call we get that giving people a completely empty WordPress template also doesn't work, right? That folks need a certain amount of guidance. And so our next phase is to really revise our existing templates to strip back the level of instructional support that's right inside the template itself and start to separate out the instructions from the templates, not entirely, to guidepost, you know what I mean, to sort of signal to people what needed to be in each area, to give enough instruction so that people could like get into the back end of their WordPress and start actually adding content, but not so much that it felt overwhelming. And we also really need to make explicit, as we separate the instructions from the templates, how you go and get that information and how you go and get that support. So the support still needs to be just in time, but what we've come to recognize is that it cannot live in the template itself. That is too confusing for users, and it creates too much stress around deleting the content that they feel they may need. So that takes us to the end of our session today. And I know we're saving questions for the end, so please don't hesitate to ask. But you can also reach out to both of us, jdrozda@tru.ca or bgray@tru.ca. We'd be more than happy to share these templates or answer any questions you have about this process. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie and Brenna. And our final open pedagogy talk for today is Yang Wu from Clemson University, all the way to South Carolina, and talking about using student open pedagogy projects to improve OER design.
Hi, everyone. I want to introduce myself. My name is Yang Wu. I'm actually a Canadian from Alberta originally, but now I'm the Open Resources Librarian at Clemson University in South Carolina. And I'd like to introduce you to an initiative I'm involved in to integrate open pedagogy or OEP practices into a larger grant-funded OER project to develop large numbers of OER teaching materials to support different types of learners. I am the principal investigator of a project that's called CodeDream OER by abbreviation. It is funded by the U.S. Department of Education's Open Textbook Pilot Program. It has about roughly $760,000, and its goal is to develop 3 textbooks and ancillary materials. Many of them are interactive on robotics, which is a subject of engineering, for the technical college bachelor's, 4-year bachelor's program, and the master's level program, and students in those programs over a 3-year period, starting last year. Our project is carried out by a multi-institution consortium, consists of 3 institutions of higher learning in the American South. Tuskegee University, which is a land-grant university, which is a historic Black university, but also offers doctoral degrees. Trident Technical College, which is a 2-year technical college in South Carolina, Charleston to be precise, and this is the largest in the state. And my institution, Clemson University, which is in the American terms an R1 institution, which is a highly research-focused university. Our project has a lot of attention and interest, and we have as our advisory board companies like BMW, ABB Robotics, the South Carolina Technical College System, which is 16 institutions in the state and graduates about 250,000 students a year, the South Carolina Department of Commerce, and the state's Academic Library Consortium. So all of these organizations are very interested, and they hope to use, in fact, these books after they've been completed. So our project seeks to solve 3 problems. One is that it seeks to fill a gap in OER development. Primarily is that while there's a lot of OER materials, most of it is designed for lower level courses. It's also designed for more general courses. What we like to do is to create OER materials that are for advanced level courses and courses with a specialization. And this is to support local workforce development needs. I don't know if you know, but the American South is recently undergoing a major industrial revolution in many ways. This industrial revolution is really based on advanced manufacturing using robotics. And it's making more agrarian areas like Tuskegee, Alabama, or Greenville, South Carolina, where I'm near. It's turning these into industrial centers. And there's a major demand for workforce with skills in robotics. Also, we want to make materials that can really support diversity and extend participation in the STEM fields. A STEM field like robotics and engineering traditionally has lacked diverse representation, particularly by certainly underrepresented minority groups and also women. And we like to have our materials really support the inclusion. We want them to have inclusive examples, inclusive language and everything. And by making these OER, what we want to do is to eliminate the cost and really increase participation by disadvantaged underrepresented groups. But we face some challenges. One is that supporting personal learning is very important recently, and it's something that the Department of Education really wants. We want to develop materials that can support not only kind of diversity of learners, but also learners with different learning experiences and disabilities and things like that. We also are concerned about a recent trend in American higher education, and might exist in Canada as well. That is a decline in student use of textbooks in their studying. There's a lot of studies. In fact, this is an example from one study. And in the overall research on OER development, there isn't really a widely shared research on the learning behavior of students, particularly in different types of institutions and us at the graduate level as well. So what we've done is we've developed, the team and I have, which includes roughly about a dozen faculty and staff, have developed an approach that's called collaborative OER design. What it is that we seek to make our materials more learner-centered for different types of students by including both graduate and undergraduate students in the development process of the OER materials we're developing. And this is really a new approach, which is, it turns OER design and development into an iterative and inclusive process, bringing people with diverse backgrounds into an equitable community of practice. And what this community of practice is that our team is not only includes faculty and staff, but we also include the students. And we divide our project development team into 2 groups. One is mostly the faculty and staff, and they're going to be the OER designers and developers. But another group consists of different groups of graduate and undergraduate students led by an educational researcher. And how our OER development works is that basically the design and development team are going to create a design. They're going to create early iterations of this design, and this design is going to receive feedback from our research and implementation team of students from different backgrounds who use their experiences in the design. So this is all based on a collaborative design framework where students, graduate and undergraduate students, are involved in the project. They work collaboratively. They provide feedback on the design and development of the OER materials based on their prior learning experience. And they also provide feedback with this experience. While they're doing this, they're also given training on sort of OER design principles and sort of textbook design principles and learner-centered design principles to help them refine their thinking on how to improve OER design. And they're also asked to really reflect on their thinking, to really improve their design, to help them improve their feedback on the design of OER materials. And they're given a great deal of agency in the process. We were thinking about the best approach really to carry out this collaborative design concept in practice. And we came upon, the larger idea of open pedagogy practice. And there's a lot of connections to open pedagogies, primarily because open pedagogy and our collaborative design framework are both based on a learner-centered and constructivist learning framework. A lot of the ideas are quite similar to basic open pedagogy ideas. For the success of our project, we need the students who are participating to really critically reflect on their own learning and the design of the OER materials. And student engagement is critical for them to provide good feedback and enable us to design good OER materials. So we saw a lot of connections between this and open pedagogy, and we've applied open pedagogy to the project and to the collaborative design part and the student research and implementation part in this way. So this is a timeline of the project. We're first going to do the bachelor's level textbook, but we're also going to do the technical textbook and the graduate level textbook. Our collaborative design and its application of open pedagogy is really continuous, and it happens throughout this entire textbook development period or OER development period. And what we're doing, starting with this term, is that we've applied open pedagogy in two ways to support the OER development. One is involving a group of graduate students. Another is involving a group of undergraduate students. The graduate students are from Clemson. There are roughly about 15 students, including many from underrepresented and minority groups, in an advanced robotics course. They're asked to write a textbook introducing certain concepts of robotics. These are kind of concepts that could be for general concepts, but also for advanced learners. These textbooks are, they're asked to really think about how they want to write this. The textbook they're writing is not related to the final materials that we're developing, but rather certain topics that could relate to the final materials. And for the undergraduates, we've gathered a group of undergraduates from our two of our institutions, the Tuskegee University and Clemson. Many of them are minority and underrepresented students as well. We put them into a directed study course where they're going to learn and give feedback to the materials that we're going to be designing. So how it works in practice is that both groups are going to create assignments or engage in open pedagogy projects where they create information. But this process is going to allow us to give the students an opportunity to reflect on how they learn and their ideas on good learning resources for other students. For the graduate students, we have them write this textbook, as I mentioned, of different topics. Each student writes a chapter based on around the topic of roughly about around 10 to 15 pages. They're given a general guideline, but they're given a great deal of flexibility in terms of how they want to express this chapter and how they want others to learn. But they're asked to justify why they made certain decisions, how they write that chapter. And they also peer review each other's chapters and give each other feedback. And this is a way to get the graduate students to really reflect on, how do I learn? How is someone who has had undergraduate training in robotics, what did I learn about learning from those experiences? How do I, as a graduate student, reflect on my learning? As a way to understand graduate students, how they learn, and also how they might, what experiences they gain from their undergraduate period, which could be useful in the development of both the undergraduate and the graduate textbooks. For the undergraduate students, what they're doing is they're engaged in this larger discussion about learner-designed principles. They learn things such as universal learning design. They also learn about social justice issues, such as anti-racism and other things. And they use this along with they do readings in these subjects. And they also are engaged in continual discussions on these subjects, where they're encouraged to draw on their learning experiences in terms of, do I encounter these issues? How could my learning have been better using learner-centered design principles? And they're really given a number of scaffolded activities. First, they just read certain concepts in learner-centered design, UDO and other things. Then they're given more advanced activities, such as they look through existing robotics textbooks and they say, do these actually support my learning needs as a student, especially students from diverse backgrounds? Do these support student learning? And in the end, they give feedback on the design of the OER materials we're creating right now. And although they're doing this, they're also asked to create non-disposable assignments. They're encouraged to post their reflections on what they learned as a class at the end of the class online on the website. And they're also encouraged to seek to present their experiences in conferences. So this is something that we've been trying and it's ongoing, but we think we've had some good progress. The graduate students are very interested. They've engaged in very colorful discussions of their own undergraduate learning experience and other things. This is a book that they're creating right now. And so, the graduate students are also very active in that. The undergraduates are also very active in that. So what we hope to do in the end is that by the end of the course, we would ask the students, we will gain a lot of information from the graduate students about their learning and how they wish to teach from their learning. We would also, encourage students who have been very active in the course to become our graduate student assistants in the development of the OER materials, to really integrate their reflections into taking part in the actual design of the OER materials. We also want the undergraduate students to gradually give feedback on the OER materials that are being created as well. Also, this is just for the undergraduate level from Tuskegee and Clemson University. We hope to apply similar open pedagogy methods with another class from the technical college level with our partner, the Trident Technical College. And we also, so far, our graduate class is from Clemson University, which is, a university that includes students of many backgrounds. But we also want to, create a graduate course that applies open pedagogy and can get students to reflect on their learning. I can get graduate students to reflect their learning experiences and how they would teach something from a minority serving institution like Tuskegee University. And we also hope to get the undergraduates to eventually be able to become researchers on their own who can help us design research on wider groups of students. So this is kind of applying open pedagogy to motivate the students and get them to even support our research in the end. So thank you very much. Here are some of the works I cited for the concepts I used. And here's my contact information. Thank you.